It's your Thursday Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back with all of you for another day and another good show coming up. Randy Johnson from the Star-Tribune covers college football. Gophers college football joins me here in just a little while to talk about last week's disappointment. Let's just call it that. I think we could all call it that fairly. 31-13 loss to North Carolina. We've talked about that extensively this week already. But Randy has some fresh perspectives, of course, being the beat writer. He was there as well in North Carolina. We also have to spin this forward, take a look at kind of the big picture. Quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis has struggled this year. Maybe not a surprise, given that he's still relatively young and new in the program, but they will need him and the rest of the offense to step it up going forward, make better decisions, have better accuracy, and turn a lot of these drives that have resulted in short field goals into touchdowns, especially when they get into the meat of the Big Ten season. Now, this weekend maybe offers them a little bit of an opportunity. They play Northwestern. Northwestern not one of the elite teams in the Big Ten, struggling again this season. Chance for the Gophers to get to 2-0 in conference play, start feeling a little bit better about themselves, but they have to do it. They have to execute. This is still a Big Ten team they're playing. They can't just walk in there and expect to win. So Randy and I will break all that down here in just a little bit. Got a bunch of other stuff to get to today. Like I've talked about, this is kind of the convergence time of the season, late September, early October, especially when the Twins are playing well, which they are. We've got to get to a coronation on the way here very soon. We've got to get to some season ending here in a little bit too, and a season beginning here in a little bit. First, though, what did I miss? Dueling desperation in Minnesota sports. Let's start with the Vikings. 0-2, which we've talked about a lot already this week, especially a couple days ago with Royce, and some yesterday too. I brought a few things up yesterday, including the Dalton Risner signing. But 0-2 right now. Started out as home underdogs to the Chargers. I think that maybe that line has moved into more of an even line, but started out as 2-point underdogs to the Chargers at home. Chargers also 0-2. More to the point, though, two moves already this week that signal to me that the plan going into the season wasn't working, and they felt not just the need to tweak, but the need to kind of urgently fix something that they had months to address. The first one, of course, was Risner, the guard brought in on a one-year deal, prorated $4 million deal, more than $2 million guaranteed. We talked a lot about that on the Access Vikings podcast that went live Wednesday. Mailbag episode, by the way, goes live today, so listen for that. We talked a lot about that and just kind of why the timing of that, why now, why not do that when he was in for a visit in August. I'm still not exactly sure. I'm still a little bit baffled why they didn't do it then. I think Dalton Risner, if you read his quotes in Ben Gessling's story today, is a little bit baffled as well that he didn't draw at least a little bit more free agency interest than he did ultimately get and sign with the Vikings, because he had started 62 games in his first 4 years in the league with the Broncos. Someone with whom the Vikings are familiar, someone with whom should bolster the line. Why not do it sooner? I don't know. They did it now because, A, the offensive line has been decimated already by injuries. No Garrett Bradbury since very early in the first game of the season. No Oli Udoh after his season-ending injury last week. Christian Darrisaw has been limited. He's got that ankle injury. He didn't play against Philadelphia. He was kind of limping around on it in that first game against Tampa Bay. No guarantees that he plays this week, although you would imagine he will try. So already, A, hit with their depth has taken a hit, and B, the players that have been in there at guard, especially Ed Ingram, have not done a good job this season. These are guys who struggled last year to a degree, Ingram and Ezra Cleveland. Cleveland, to me, has always been the better of those two, the more experienced of those two, but they don't seem terribly high on either one of them, even though both of them are second-round picks, even though one of them, Ingram, is a second-round pick of the current regime, taken in 2022, the first draft under Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. So, they don't like their depth, they don't like the start to the year, and they don't like their injury, so they go get Dalton Risner. It makes sense. They had a need, but why didn't they get him sooner? Well, it feels right now, like I said, like they rediscovered that they had a need when they weren't able to get much going in the running game. Kirk Cousins has taken, I think, 19 hits already this season, so the pass game, even though it's been effective, even though he's got good numbers this year, has taken a toll on Cousins already. In each of those losses, there's been a strip sack of Cousins on a big hit that's resulted in a pretty big turnover in the other direction. Fumbles deep in the Vikings' own territory, I believe, in both cases on those plays. So there's definitely a need, but it does feel to me like desperation. You bring in Dalton Risner, and more to that, you bring in Cam Akers. They trade for Cam Akers yesterday. It's a very low leverage swap. They trade a conditional 6th round pick. They get a conditional 7th round pick and Cam Akers from the Rams, and these are 2026 picks. So these are like 3 years down the line. Basically, the Rams get a pick that's going to be 30 spots higher late in the draft. There's a tiny bit of value there. It's basically like, instead of releasing him, let's get a little bit of value for him, something like that. So you get Cam Akers, who, has a bit of a track record, and Kevin O'Connell obviously knows him coming from the Rams, but is this really a guy who's going to, affect your running game in a big way? I mean, look at his numbers. He did run for 786 yards last season, 4.2 yards per carry. 2021 barely played at all. 2020 had a pretty good year, over 600 yards. This year, 1 game, 1 start, 22 carries for 29 yards. Is this the guy that's going to revive your running game? I don't know. They probably aren't expecting him to be a savior, probably just an opportunity to get a little bit more quality depth in here, which they don't feel like they've had at this point. So I get it. I get why they made these moves, but it's weird to me that they have done this early in the season. It just speaks to me of a team that maybe underestimated its need and overestimated its plan going into the season, to now have to do this, to be facing what to me is like we said, I think Andrew Kramer on Access Vikings Wednesday said this is as close to a must-win game as you can get in September. And I agree with that. It kind of feels like a crossroads for this team. They lose this game. The history of 0-3 teams making the playoffs in the NFL, even if there was a 7-team playoff, is basically like 2%. Like, this is not a good look if they lose this game. Now, the Chargers are very beatable. They've already been beaten twice. They will do things to hurt themselves, and they are not a top 5 or top 10 team even when they are firing on all cylinders. So I'm not saying they're in this kind of situation where, oh man, they're 0-2 and they've got a game where they can't, where they're not likely to win. I think they're still, a coin flip, maybe a little bit better to win this game. But if they lose, I think they understand the position they're in. So a lot to take in from the Vikings already this season, a lot to understand about maybe their plan wasn't the best right now. And speaking of maybe the plan wasn't the best right now, the other part of the dueling desperation, Minnesota United up 3-1 at the LA Galaxy on Wednesday. Cough up that lead in the second half, give up 3 late goals to LA, lose 4-3, fall below the line to even get into the play-in in Major League Soccer. They've got this play-in now. Top 7 in each conference make it. 8 and 9 play the play-in round to get into the bigger playoffs. They are 10th now. Still 5 matches left in the regular season, 3 of them, I believe, at Allianz Field. And Adrian Heath kind of described those 3 matches as the ones that will probably define their season. But he was pretty harsh in his criticism of the way this one unfolded. You don't usually see, specific criticism of players, and he didn't really name names, but he was obviously upset afterwards, said, "We managed to throw a game away that we should have won. We can talk about the reasons why." Reading from Jerry Zagoda's stuff, he used the words stupid decisions, schoolboy stuff, and comical to describe the goals that were given up and some of the decisions that were made. It was, There was one other quote I'm trying to find here. People not doing their job, Heath said, a lot of times, I have to be honest, it's the same people involved in some of this stuff. We'll have to evaluate it all. Now is not the time. And he's talking about a lot of late goals conceded at the ends of games this season that have really cost the Loons, who are trying to make the playoffs for, I believe, the 5th season in a row. And another piece of concern to take from that game, Emmanuel Reynoso subbed out at halftime. He's been, kind of nursing an injury. Probably doesn't sound like something too serious, and they were up 3-1, so maybe the decision was in part, hey, let's protect the lead, protect Reynoso, but that backfires a little bit when they give up the lead and don't have Reynoso in there to maybe try to get the goals back. So all around tough night in LA for Minnesota United, and their desperation started to set in. They're going to need some better performances, especially late in the season and late in games, to turn this thing around and make the playoffs for a 5th consecutive season. Feels like that's too negative of a way to end this opening segment, though, so let's talk Twins for just a minute. A dramatic 9th inning win over the Reds. They get 3 in the 9th to beat the Reds 5-3. The Guardians lose again. Magic number down to 1. That means if the Guardians lose tonight, the Twins clinch, or the Twins have, I think, 9 more opportunities to play to clinch this thing. 9 up with 9 to play. So that is a great sign for them. A season that was, uneven all around. Probably some good news, too. They said Carlos Correa went on the injured list, but they are very optimistic that he'll be back for the postseason. Royce Lewis, MRI on that hamstring. We'll know more about that today. Those are probably the bigger questions right now than when they're going to clinch, any kind of clinching scenarios. And also keep an eye on this. The Twins just 4 games back of the Astros in the AL West leading Astros. Now, it would take a lot for the Twins to pass them down the stretch here, especially because the Twins probably aren't going to be playing some of their best players once they clinch, and because there are 2 teams, the Mariners and the Rangers, right behind the Astros, a half game out. So all 3 of those teams would have to fall apart while the Twins won. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Twins could get that bye in the first round of the playoffs. Probably not likely, but it's closer than I thought it would be at the end of the season. So keep an eye on that until that is no longer a possibility as well.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
Gophers football writer Randy Johnson joins me now here on Daily Delivery. Randy, we both saw the same thing in North Carolina from different vantage points. You up in the press box. I was down kind of on field level almost in that touchdown club for that game with some friends. Lots of fun to be there, taking the atmosphere. Not as much fun to be there if you are playing for the Gophers, though. 31-13 loss to North Carolina. Randy, the game, you wrote about it, Chip wrote about it. It came down to more than just one thing, but if we are going to boil it down to its essence, North Carolina's quarterback is a likely top 5, top 10 draft pick in next year's NFL draft. Drake May, he played very well, had over 400 yards passing against the Gophers. Ethan Kaliakmanis for the Gophers. He's in his 3rd year, but some growing pains right now. 11 for 29, I believe, in that game. Missed some throws that he probably would have liked to have off target with some others that led to some stalled drives and interceptions. What did you make first of his day? And maybe as a follow-up, what's your concern level about him kind of in the big picture based on what we've seen in that game and others this year?
Yeah, Ethan had a rough day. It wasn't helped too. He had some guys slip on routes. He had some a couple drop passes that hurt him, but he was not accurate too, and that's been a concern so far this year. He seems like he's throwing behind guys at time, and it sounds like that's not happening in practice. It sounds like in practice he's been pretty accurate. He looked very accurate in the times we saw him in training camp. They got to get that resolved. They need to get that passing game going. Interesting stat. They have yet to have a offensive play this year of longer than 30 yards. So they've had no explosive plays at all this year. They had some in the 20s, but they need to get that offense moving.
If he's accurate in practice but not games, is it a speed thing then we think in games, or a kind of a live pass rush kind of rattling him a little bit? How will we diagnose that? Because it's, if you're a Gopher fan, it's probably heartening to hear that maybe accuracy isn't necessarily a hallmark or a potentially long-term problem, because accuracy is hard to teach, right? Like if you're not accurate in general, that's a hard thing to teach. But what is not translating from practice to games right now?
I just think it's experience. This is his first year starting as a full-time starter. I think it'll come. It just hasn't yet. I think, got to get him out there again. Got to get him out there and see if, whatever it takes to get the offense going. I think, they didn't use him much against Eastern Michigan. Maybe that's a lost opportunity. They turned the emphasis there was get the running game going, and it got going well in that game, and it performed very well at North Carolina too. But you need the passing game going too. So you got to get your quarterback some reps, and more than just the 15 like he had at against Eastern Michigan. They had to pass more this week because they fell behind right away, 14-0 after the first two possessions. So yeah, they're going to have issues if they can't generate a good passing attack the rest of the season.
Red zone has been a big problem. They settled for another short field goal. I believe that was the one that made it 14-3. I'm sure they would have loved to have had 7 there. I mean, against Eastern Michigan didn't matter as much, but was kind of foreshadowing for that first, good drive that at least they got points on against North Carolina. What's the disconnect there, do you think? Why is this a small sample size? Do they have an offense that's not built to get there from 5-10 yards? What do we think is the problem so far this year with scoring once you get really close?
It usually isn't one culprit. It's it's been different things. You get down close, somebody makes a mistake, or somebody ball is behind somebody or goes off somebody's hands. It's having all 11 being on the same page at the same time and doing their jobs. I'm sure it's frustrating for them. They've scored 4 touchdowns through 3 games and have 7 field goals and a safety. You got to get that ball in the end zone. And I'm sure they're working on it. It's just a matter of translating what you do into practice to the field during the game.
You mentioned the running game. Seems like they've found something with Taylor, the freshman. He's been awfully good these last 2 games, and it was highly touted coming in. Are we getting to the point now where I think I asked you this after Eastern Michigan when he had that breakout game, but I think he was freshman of the week again for the second straight week. You don't usually get that in this league, but he obviously earned it against North Carolina. Is he the guy now? Is this the guy they're going to try to ride? Have we seen that he's got that kind of burst that maybe the rest of them, Tyler and everybody else, just don't have yet?
Yeah, he'll be their guy. I don't know if he's going to be a 33 carry guy, something like that. We saw against Eastern Michigan. He had 22 carries, 138 yards this week. He's going to be their primary runner. They'll get Sean Tyler in there as a change of pace back. And you look at Tyler, he's more effective when he can work on the edges. He gets shut down pretty quickly inside usually. Taylor's got quite a bit more power. He can move that pile quite a bit. So he's obviously he'll have his ups and downs too. He's a freshman, but so far he's been pretty good.
Defense gave up those 2 early scores. They kind of kept things close for a while, especially with the 2 interceptions of Drake May. But overall on the day, like I said, 400 passing yards for Drake May. North Carolina had close to 100 or around 100 on the ground. So over 500 total yards of offense and, of course, 31 points. The defense had been awfully good the first 2 weeks, and we still think that's probably at least the more polished side of the ball right now. What's the concern level coming off that game, giving up that many yards, or do you say probably not going to face a quarterback like that again this year?
Maybe not quite that good, but you got some coming up like Michigan's J.J. McCarthy, who's pretty efficient. The big plays killed him early. North Carolina gets 46-yard touchdown pass on the first possession. Then there's some confusion on the second possession on the sideline. They don't get the substitutions in quickly enough, and tight end goes down the middle for a 55-yard gain to the 1. Those are, this has been a team that over the last couple of years has been very good at limiting the big plays, and that was not the case in the first half on Saturday.
So where do they kind of go from here? It's Northwestern this week. They're pretty big favorites, double digits, 11, 12 points. I saw it was the early look. So people, at least the odds makers not dissuaded from what they saw, A, I guess, from the Gophers against North Carolina, and B, probably from what they've seen from Northwestern so far this year. What needs to get better to make sure they not only win this game, but kind of feel like they have the momentum going into, the rest of the season to make this the kind of year they want to have?
They need, it sounds real simple, but they need to score touchdowns.
Yeah.
Get those 7 points. Don't settle for 3. And I think they have to show themselves that they can do that consistently. This is a chance where it's not necessarily going to be the easiest of games. On the road. Northwestern's not great, but they're still a Big Ten team, and you just can't just take them for granted. They need to impose their will on Northwestern and get that ball in the end zone a few times, 3, 4, 5 times. And, that I think that'll do a lot for their psyche.
Couple more things for you, Randy Johnson, Gopher football. Number one, we saw when Kalakmanis had to leave the game for cramping, Cole Kramer comes in, throws a bad interception. He's been a good kind of change of pace quarterback over the years, but if he was better than Kalakmanis, he'd obviously be playing more right now, and I don't think he is. This is kind of Kalakmanis' show, right? Like, he needs to kind of figure this out because there's not this kind of internal push behind him right now, right?
Yeah, I don't think I think PJ will have a pretty long leash on Kalakmanis on keeping him as a starter. Though he did say he has called Cole Kramer and Ethan. He has 2 starters. He likes to say. I do think that Cole had a very good spring and a good training camp, so he has improved. I don't think that one throw Saturday was characteristic of what he is as a quarterback. I think it was just he had a bad read and he hung it up there. But yeah, I think they're comfortable if they have to put in Kramer for an injury situation or something like that. I don't think they're to the point where they're considering a change yet. No,
I wouldn't think so. I'm not even suggesting that, but I'm just kind of like, as you kind of map out the season, like, would there be a point where they did that? But also, at that point, then you're kind of saying, well, then what's the plan going forward? Because they're looking at Kalakmanis, I would imagine, is at least, it's potentially a long-term starter. He's only a sophomore. I know they've got some guys, they're always bringing in recruits. They've got a fairly highly regarded guy playing in Arkansas right now. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. They do. Lindsay is his name, last name. Basically, yeah. Right now on their roster, they got Darius Taylor's teammate as the third stringer, Drew Viato, and then the fourth would be the walk-on Max Chikonjansky from Stillwater.
Okay, so kind of his show to run, but I think we need to see more. I would characterize this as an uneven start to the year at best. And I'm sure he's probably his own biggest critic, right?
Yeah, Ethan fell on the sword big time after the game. He was really hard on himself, blaming himself for this not being good enough. Not he wasn't. People had asked him about the cramps. He goes, "Hey, that's not an excuse. I just got to play better." Yeah, I don't think you're gonna. This kid works pretty hard. He's gonna be hard on himself, and he's gonna put in the work to improve. It's just a matter of making that show up on the field.
Saw a true freshman, right, at on the offensive line. That's pretty rare.
Yeah, Greg Johnson got in and played a good amount. They're very high on this kid out of Prior Lake. They haven't. One of the guard spots has been a little unsettled, and he's impressed them and through training camp and obviously through practices so far. So he's in there.
Final thing, any update on Cody Lindenberg? We were watching him in warmups. We're like, hey, he doesn't have his pads on. That doesn't look like a great sign. I'm sure he's close, but he makes the defense a lot different.
Yeah, they had some tackling issues against North Carolina, and I think had he been able to play, that probably would have helped there. And I would expect him in there this week if, as long as there are no setbacks. He was listed as questionable last week. The kind of the buzz leading up to the North Carolina game was that there was a pretty good chance he would play, but PJ Fleck said the training staff held him out. But with another week, I would think that he has a much better chance to play this week.
And this wasn't a Big Ten loss. It's they're still 1-0 in the conference. Doesn't look like the West is going to be great this year. But the North Carolina the game though still kind of felt like a little bit of a measuring stick. And you look at Michigan, Ohio State on the schedule later this year, and if you can't beat North Carolina and or lose by 18, those don't feel like they're particularly within reach or winnable games. How do you kind of frame the overall season outlook kind of after 3 games and what we've seen so far? Well,
I would say that the record is probably what most people have thought it'd be. They thought that they were underdogs going out to North Carolina and they lost. That's not a huge surprise at all,
no.
Or a surprise at all. It's the way they've looked that I think people have been a bit disappointed, especially on offense. I think a lot of people expected a much more clean type of offensive performance so far, and they haven't got that. It's not been nearly efficient enough, as the touchdowns versus field goals have shown. That said, they're on schedule in the Big Ten West. It's you look at it, yeah, they're going to have to beat the West teams to win the West. If you project losses to Michigan and Ohio State, which I imagine most people will do, to win that West, if you have 2 conference losses, you better not lose a third game in the against the West team. I think it's a situation where it does look winnable. Right now probably team that looking the best is Iowa, and I'm not saying that's they've been overly impressive. They put together a good offensive game this past weekend, but they're not. We'll know a lot more about them this weekend. They play Penn State. Wisconsin's had its ups and downs. They lost out at Washington State the previous week. They bounced back with the help of 6 turnovers from Georgia Southern to pull away. Illinois looks down. They hung in there for a while with Ohio State there, but Penn State. I think it's the Gophers. They should be a contender in the West. It's just they just didn't get the offense going better than it has so far.
Well, maybe a chance to get well this weekend against Northwestern, but you're right. Against anybody, especially in the Big Ten, you got to turn those trips inside the 10 into touchdowns, not field goals, and that's something to watch for this week, even against a opponent that they look to be much better on paper than. We'll see though. Randy Johnson, as always, appreciate it. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks a lot, Mike. See ya.
Good stuff from Randy Johnson, as always, and a big game for the Gophers. I don't care if the opponent is not great. They've got some stuff to figure out on their own end, regardless of who they are playing. We need to see them play a more complete offensive game. We need to see more from Ethan Kaliak-Manis in this game, and it would be nice to see them kind of come out and win a game comfortably against a, not a quality opponent, but a Big Ten opponent, a team that, has had success in the past, a team that can beat you if you are not playing up to your, at least, average capability. So I want to see a lot from them this weekend against Northwestern. We'll see if they can deliver. Speaking of time to deliver, let's finish with the cooler, a beginning and an end right here in the cooler. Start with the end, which is only fitting. The Lynx, their season's over. We talked a lot about that on Wednesday's show with Kent Youngblood, this opportunity they had after rallying to make the playoffs, and then rallying in Game 2 after some tough games at the end of the season. Forced a Game 3 at Target Center against Connecticut on Wednesday night, but Connecticut, the better team all year, the more experienced playoff players. The Lynx fall short 90-75, and the story of the game was pretty easy to decipher. Nafisa Collier had 31 points. Nobody else did much of anything in terms of scoring. I think Kent wrote that until late in the game, nobody else had even double figures for the Lynx, and they couldn't contain Connecticut offensively as well. So it was probably the just result in this game. I know Connecticut has been the better team all year. Where the Lynx go from here is an interesting question. I think they've got some foundational pieces. Obviously, with Collier playing at a very high level, Cheryl Reeve saying an MVP level this season. I don't think she's wrong, especially with the way we saw her play in this game and in a lot of these other games down the stretch. Kayla McBride is good. Diamond Miller, the number 2 overall pick, she had her moments this year, but she can take another step forward, and they will still get a decent draft pick next year in what should be a fairly deep draft. They probably won't have a shot at the best of the best players because they did make the postseason this year, but they will get another piece around which they could perhaps build their foundation. And it's not always those number 1 or number 2 picks that become those pieces. Nafisa Collier could be taken with around the same pick, was taken with perhaps around the same pick as what the Lynx will get this year in the draft, so maybe they can find another player like that to complement their core. But a little bit of an interesting offseason for them. Maybe they can add some players in free agency as well, because they're going to have a lot of room, I believe, with a lot of contracts set to expire. Now, that's the ending. The beginning, the Wild back on the ice now. It doesn't feel quite real. It's September, but here they are. Like I said the other day, the preseason games start almost immediately. I think their first preseason game is in like 3 days. Like, get back on the ice, skate around a little bit, and then let's go. Let's go start to throw some pucks on net, start to play these games. Their season will be here before we know it, just a few weeks from now. Some intrigue around this. Can they take the next step? Can they avoid taking a step back? I think those are two valid questions. I think they've overachieved to a certain degree in recent years, not in the playoffs, but certainly in the regular season. I don't think we can automatically assume that will continue this year, but so they're going to be measured in 2 different ways. Can they sustain in the regular season, and then can they go beyond once they get to the playoffs? Three competitive playoff series each of the last 3 years, but ultimately the same result, disappointing losses in extended series in the first round. Kind of the story of the franchise for a long time, and the story of the franchise lately. That will do it for me today. Plenty more Twins talk tomorrow, among other things, with Lavelle E. Neal III. That is the expectation, at least. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow.